Good morning, everyone. Happy Sunday. Welcome to the Revenge Garden. I am Carmen Cook. I hope all of my U.S. friends had a wonderful Thanksgiving week filled with family and fun and laughter. And thank you all so much for tuning in week after week to hear these excerpts. We are going to start with Leigh Edwards' Autumn's Magical Pact. Brocken awoke to thoughts of the beautiful young healer. He had to see her again. It was early when he trudged through the dark woods. Should he wait? He certainly wouldn't want to disturb her sleep and further disenchant her after the bad impression he'd made at yesterday's market. And how would he conceal his attraction to her? Why was he fretting? Women rarely rattled his confidence. Rhiannon, he said her name aloud. It matched her uncommon beauty. He hoped that this wasn't where she lived. She shone so brightly she shouldn't be found in a dreary forest. He espied a small cottage, a hut really, in obvious disrepair, the thatched roof nearly bare. A battered kettle hung on an iron hook. Maybe this wasn't her home. Perhaps an old man lived here in such squalor. Yet there was the well-attended garden with vegetables, herbs, and even flowers. Brocken was nearly to the cottage when the door opened, and he leapt behind a tree. It was the lovely Rhiannon who stepped from within. The rising sun shone through the trees, lighting the small clearing. Her unbound hair cascaded to her waist, lovely light brown tresses with strands of gold further highlighting the sun's rays. Garbed in a sheer shift, she shivered in the early morning freshness, stretched and smiled up at the sun. Stepping to the side of the cottage, she tugged up the bottom of her garment and squatted, giving him a clear view of her lovely, shapely arse. Brocken stood stock still, trying to remain unnoticed, especially since he gazed at her for long. But his footing wasn't sound. A twig snapped beneath his boot. Her head shot up. A flash of fear filled her unusual light blue eyes. Spotting him, she looked slightly perturbed, yet relieved, too. Dwelling on her many concerns and worrying for her missing father, Rhiannon barely slept. Foolishly distracted, she didn't even look to see if anyone was about. She'd been absent-mindedly relieving herself when she heard something. She prayed it was a squirrel, or maybe a deer. Her heart raced. Could be anyone, even Godric. She glanced up to see Lord Brockwell. She felt her cheeks flame, but inwardly was soothed. Although she scarcely knew the Irishman, had even heard rumors of his colorful past, she didn't believe he'd harm her. "You might at least turn around," she rebuked. He cleared his throat uncomfortably, but looked away. "You said your cottage was on Brockwell land. I thought I'd discover where you lived." She finished what she was doing, wiped herself with moss, and then straightened her shift. "Well, now you found me. What is it you want?" She reached inside the cottage door, retrieving the woolen crossover shawl, wrapped it around herself, and then tied it. She located an iron strike-a-light, walked to the charred circle, struck the object against the flint, and then added wood from the dwindling pile. "You've no hearth inside?" Brocken asked. Has not been used in a long while." She saw him look at her meager cottage, the scanty size, the dilapidated state of it. Surely he pitied her. "Your father's still sleeping, then?" "He just left," she lied. "Your wood supply is low. Let me chop some for you." "I'm usually capable, but I wrenched my elbow. Father's been occupied lately. He'll surely replenish the woodpile tonight. Besides, I'm certain you have important lordly things to do." He laughed at that, and she smiled, liking the sound of his laugh. "And what might that be?" he grinned. "I'm common born, not even a lady, much less a lord. I'm sure I don't know a lord's duties. Perhaps consuming great quantities of abundant food and drink, counting your coin, calculating your ledgers, sternly ordering your servants about, riding your extensive land, reveling in all you own, finding a noble woman to marry, warm your bed, and provide you with numerous sons." He removed his brown leather overcoat and tossed it onto the ground. "You do amuse me, Lady Albury." She stared at his broad chest and shoulders as he picked up the weighty axe and swung it with ease. How she wished he'd removed his tunic, too. Seeing his brawny chest would undoubtedly be agreeable. She looked away, cheeks warm from observing his muscularity. He was easily accomplishing what would have taken her an age, re-injured her elbow, and caused several blisters. "What food will you prepare to break fast?" he asked as he worked. "Are you inviting yourself to my table?" He smiled again, that damn beguiling smile. It caused heat within her as much as watching him. "Not unless you'd be inclined to invite me. I drink a concoction of beneficial herbs placed in boiled water, a medicinal tea. If you'd care to join me in thanks for chopping the wood, I wouldn't object if you leave straight after." "You have plans, then?" he asked. "Becoming attired would be first." "If I'm being honest, I'm quite liking the look of you just as you are." His eyes rested on her bare feet and nearly see-through shift that fell to her knees. You're a very forward man. Does such brash talk make women clamor to your bed? His eyebrow arched. You do seem most interested in my bed. You've twice mentioned it this morning, and the dawn's barely broken. Her face became fiery hot again. Turning away, Rhiannon procured dried herbs and placed them in the kettle over the fire. She entered the cottage, closed and bolted the door. Leaning against it, she inhaled several times. The Irishman wholly unnerved her. She donned her longer shift, petticoats and rust-colored kirtle, placed a shawl over that, and then pulled on stockings and boots. The chopping outside stopped, and she heard footsteps. Maiden Aubrey, I apologize if I've affronted you. Again, he called through the door. It was done in jocularity. I meant no disrespect. Opening the door, she stared up at him, looking fine and very tall. With his tunic partially opened, his chest glistened from his recent exertion. His ruggedly appealing face wore an abashed expression. She was completely unhinged by her attraction to him. You don't affront me, Lord Brockwell. I've come to expect such talk from men. That is an excerpt from Leigh Ann Edwards' Autumn's Magical Pact. And next we will shift over to an exclusive sneak peek from Sabrina York's The Soldier's Refuge, which is coming in spring of 2023. It was a gorgeous day. Nat threw her head back and just soaked it all in. By the time Danny found a good spot for fishing, based on decades of experience in these waters and a little machine on the bridge that showed schools on radar, the sun had risen, painting the sky and the water a wash of orange and rose. Normally those two colors didn't complement each other, but somehow God made it work. She sighed and pulled her jacket closer, hugging herself as she braced against a swell. She loved the gentle sway of the boat, the call of the gulls as they recognized a potential meal, and the smell of the coffee Jax had brought her from the galley before joining the other men setting the lines. The kids were adorable, standing in a row at the stern in their orange life jackets waiting for the fish to bite. Nat pulled out her phone and took some photos for Amy, and then wandered the deck, taking more shots here and there. Every shot was a keeper. It was like that on a day like today. Point and click. She got some really good shots of John Jay reeling in his first big catch, nearly 6 inches, and another of Georgie focusing intently on baiting his hook, tongue out and all, and some of Jax in action, reeling in a big salmon, and then his dismay when it escaped. Then one of Ben bending down to explain something to Quinn, who stared at him with wide, adoring eyes. Another of Ben and Daddy on the bridge, deep in conversation. After a while, she pulled out her book and sat in the sun at the bow and pretended to read. But really, she was just enjoying the day. How had she forgotten how much she loved this? Having fun? She looked up as Jax plopped down beside her. It had started to warm up, so he stripped down to his t-shirt, revealing the forearms she'd been obsessed with as a girl, muscled and tan and sprinkled with dark hairs. Gosh, she wanted to pet him. Would it be rude to pet him? Probably. This is wonderful, Jax. I'm so glad I got invited. He chuckled. You can get invited anytime you want to be invited. There was something there in his expression that made her wonder if he wasn't just talking about fishing. But she couldn't ask, because how would she ask? What would she say? Hey, Nat? The tenor of his voice shifted a little, and he looked around to make sure they were alone. Her heart hitched. She stuck her thumb in the book she wasn't reading and told her place. Yeah? Well, I'm not sure how to ask this. Just ask. She leaned in and gave him a nudge. The heat of his sun-warmed arm kissed hers. Part of her wanted to keep leaning. Okay. Well, this morning, when I saw you at Amy's... Yes? Was I imagining it, or has something changed? Changed? She nearly burst out laughing, but she didn't. Something about you seemed, different. Ah. She glanced at him and then away, because she couldn't seem to hold his gaze as she said her truth. Well, this morning I found out you're not dating Amy. Could that be it? He stared at her. What? Why did you think I was dating Amy? She shrugged and said on a self-depreciating laugh, well, because that morning you answered her door first thing in the morning, half naked. I wasn't half naked. You kinda were. Any normal human woman would have made the assumption that you'd slept over. I did sleep over. She made a noise in the back of her throat. Any normal human woman would make the assumption that you'd slept over with her. For some reason, he still looked a little stunned at her revelation. I sleep in the guest room on the ground floor when I stay over. I didn't know that. Well, why didn't you ask Amy about it then? Because she hadn't wanted to hear the answer, maybe? My family doesn't excel at straightforward communication, in case you haven't noticed. He chuckled then, because the dysfunction in the Tuttle communication was hard to miss. Then he leaned closer and sealed his arm against hers, and a shiver racked her. Why didn't you ask me? He asked in a soft voice. She barked a laugh. How stupid would that have looked? Excuse me, are you dating this woman whose waffle iron you're on a first-name basis with? That's hardly fair. He said that waffle iron forgets my name all the time. She snorted a laugh, which made him laugh too. Then, when he sobered, he held her gaze and said, well, if you have anything you want to know about me, just ask. And he said it so sincerely, she had to believe he would honor that invitation. And though the thought made her stomach churn, she sucked in a deep breath and did just that. She asked, would you have kissed me the other night in the studio if Ben hadn't burst in? He didn't answer. For a long while, there was only the slap of waves on the hull and the whip of the wind in her ear, so she peeped at him. His expression stole her breath. It was hungry. Without saying a thing, he cupped his hands on her cheeks and pulled her right into his face. And then he kissed her. Hard. It was a kiss that said, you gotta ask? But with a smile. He pulled back to look at her as though to assess the success of his communication. And then he kissed her again. She loved that he moaned a little in the back of his throat as he took her mouth again and again, as though he was starving for her. It sent a sizzle of heat up and down her spine. She couldn't help but respond and tangle her fingers in his hair to pull him closer as he deepened the kiss, only growling a little because his hair was too damn short to get a good grip. Hey, kids, Ben bellowed in an overly jovial tone from over there. Is that a whale fluke? And then, when the kids ran starboard, he clumped over in his ridiculous yellow boots and nudged Jax with a toe. Hey, he hissed. Kids on board. And then to the kids. What? Not a whale? Oh, maybe next time. Then he took Nat's hand and hauled her to her feet. Come on, Natty Nat. Help me with the Monsters, please. I can spell, Georgie warbled. I just bet you can, Ben said, rolling his eyes. Not at Georgie. He rolled them at Jax and Nat. She hardly cared. Her soul was aloft, dancing with the gulls on the wind. Because Jax had kissed her, really kissed her, leaving absolutely no doubt in her mind. As much as she ached to explore this delicious tension with him, he wanted it too. That is an exclusive excerpt from Sabrina York's The Soldier's Refuge, which is coming early next year. I hope you enjoyed both of these excerpts. Thank you again for tuning in week after week and spending time with me in the garden. I hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.